Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tutor to You session. We're going to go through some quick revision of biopsych tonight, and then, as you can see, we're joined by familiar faces, Lara, Anne and Anna, and we'll be moving into our Paper 2 exam clinic. If you were here last week, you'll know that we just do some quick revision of a topic, and then we're going to move into answering any single question that you've got about your Paper 2. Anything that we don't get round to, bear with us. We might tackle it at the end when we do a quick rapid fire of questions, and if not, then we'll deal with it on Instagram. Okay, so let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it. Who's kicking us off tonight?
I'm kicking us off with synaptic transmission.
Okay, Lara, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so we have a list of sentences here on the board. We're going to look at the first one, action potential. So we've got two statements. Only one of them is true. I want to know which one from you is the true one. Is it A or B? So A, we've got information is passed down the axon of the neuron as a chemical impulse. Or is it B, information is passed down the axon of the neuron as an electrical impulse? What do we think for our answer? Okay, I've already got some answers coming through. I think who got in there first? Michelle Plays, OA, I think you got in there first with B. Yeah, really good to see we've got all the B's coming through. Well done. Yeah, so it is an electrical impulse. Obviously, can anybody tell me when it turns chemical? Where is it where it turns chemical in terms of when we're explaining synaptic transmission? Where does it turn chemical? So it's electrical down the axon. You could say in the neuron. Yeah, excellent. Well done. The cleft, the synapse, some of you are saying it as well. Yeah, really well done. Excellent. All right, receptor sites. Let's move on to the next one then. So we've got our in the dendrites of the postsynaptic neuron. They take up the neurotransmitter once it's crossed the synaptic gap. Or is it B, in the dendrites of the presynaptic neuron, they take up the neurotransmitter once it has crossed the synaptic gap? So let's see who got in there first. I think My Adventures, you got in there first, and it's great to see We've got all A's there, I think, so unanimous answer. Yeah, well done. They are on the postsynaptic neuron. Well done. Excitation then. So correct one. Are we thinking A or B? Receptor stimulation results in an increase in the positive charge of the postsynaptic neuron, or receptor stimulation results in a decrease in the positive charge of the postsynaptic neuron. I can't even see who got in there first, but we've got a lot of A's coming through. So let's reveal the answer here. Yeah, excitation obviously is an increase in the positive charge. And remember, we're concerning ourselves here with the postsynaptic neuron, not the presynaptic neuron. So let's have a go with inhibition then. So do we think A or B? So A is receptor stimulation results in an increase in the negative charge of the presynaptic neuron, or receptor stimulation results in a decrease in the charge of the presynaptic neuron. Okay, I think quite a lot of us are saying, well, there's a couple of mixed here, A's and B's. So we should have B here. And I believe that should say postsynaptic neuron, not presynaptic neuron as well. So yeah, that decreases the likelihood of an action potential firing in the postsynaptic neuron. So well done, those of you that got that correct. And last but not least, we do need to know the term summation. So what does summation mean? Is this the addition of positive and negative postsynaptic potential determining if the neuron is going to fire or not? Or is that concerned with the presynaptic potentials? So again, we've got a couple of mixed answers here. Remember, there's ever so slight word changing here. So summation is really to do with the neurotransmitters on the postsynaptic membrane. And that really helps us to understand whether there's going to be an excitatory or inhibitory effect there in the postsynaptic neuron. In other words, whether there's going to be another action potential that's going to fire or not. So well done, those of you. A lot of you got those ones correct. I'm going to pass you on to Anne now for Crack the Code.
Okay, so we've got this crack the code. So you need to put these in the correct order for explaining the SAM pathway. So the correct order. So put all 6 in the correct order before you press the button. And I'll try and watch who gets it first, but there's so many of you. Oh, we'll talk about who Sam is in a minute, but let's just do the answer first. Well, they went so quick then. They went so quick, but I think most of you have got the right answers. I know Rach is finding that there's so many. It's finding the first person, but I think practically everybody. It was Ellie. Oh no, somebody anonymous. I think somebody anonymous. I think was first in there. Oh no, go back further. Molly McGuire was first in there, but loads of correct answers there. Okay, so what does Sam? What does SAM stand for? What's it an abbreviation for that you really need to explain first in an answer? Somebody wants to know what the SAM pathway is. What does it stand for? Oh, well done, Ellie Crang there. Sympathomedullary pathway. So the kind of clue is it's sympathetic adrenomedullary pathway. So nearly there. But if you can remember what it means, it actually kind of tells you what it involves, because firstly, the hypothalamus in the brain decides that a stressor is a stressor. It interprets it. This activates the pathway, which then activates the adrenal medulla, which is part of the adrenal glands, and that causes adrenaline to be released. And this gets the body ready for fight or flight. And then you get the kind of physiological responses such as the increased heart rate. So it kicks off the fight or flight response there. It's the actual pathway, Sasha, the way it sort of starts at the brain, but it is sympathetic arousal. Okay then, so I'm going to pass over to Anna now.
Okay, so we're going to look at something here called red herring. It's really straightforward. You're going to tell me which of the items on the screen is the odd one out, and really importantly, why. Okay, Tricky one to start off with. So which letter do you think is the odd one out here? And why do you think it's the odd one out? Okay. All right, we've got loads of answers coming through here. Haven't got much as to why, though. I can see some answers, but not necessarily. Okay, I think, it looks like Rach and Assot is looking quite soon there on the answers. Let's just check the right answer that we should have here. So we're looking for C. So we're just talking about in terms of that stress response, that fight or flight response. These A, B, and D are acute stressors, whereas terminal illness would be a long-term, more chronic stressor. Fantastic. Right, same again. Let's go and look at another example now. So don't forget this time why it's the odd one out. So A, B, C, or D. Okay, lots of answers coming through here. Okay, I can definitely see some right answers coming through here. Okay, so the correct answer that you should have there is B, which is stopping the digestive system. And some of you have got the right reason there as well. Fantastic. So we're talking about the difference between something that's part of the sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic. So we're talking about that rest and digest state here. So stopping the digestive system will be the odd one out. Excellent. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so same again, A, B, C, D. Which of the odd one out? You're going to have to think a little bit about this one. So don't rush in. Okay, so what's the odd one out and why is it the odd one out? So Cara, so you've put the CNS, but can you tell me why it's the odd one out? Okay, right, looks like we're getting some of the right answers here. So the correct answer that you should have, and you've spotted it there, so well done, is they're different branches of the nervous system. So the autonomic, parasympathetic, and somatic are different branches versus the central nervous system, which is obviously just the brain and the spinal cord there. Fantastic, well done. Right, here we go again. So same thing again, odd one out, and why? Okay, so don't forget to tell me why it's the odd one out as well. Okay, so again, lots of answers coming through here. Fantastic. So what we should be looking for the correct answer, the odd one out, is A, because when we think about the other responses, they're all to do with that response of adrenaline. And don't forget, adrenaline is named on the specification. You could be asked specifically about the effects of adrenaline there. Right, fantastic, folks. Well done. Is that the last one? Yeah, fantastic. Right, we're back over to Lara now.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. So we're going to have a little look at the endocrine system now. Obviously, for the endocrine system, you do need to know the function of it, including glands and hormones. So here we've just got a few of the glands and hormones on the board. So I'm going to ask you guys first to try and tell me, in as much detail as you can, the function of oxytocin in the body. So that is the response to A in the box here that's missing. So can anybody tell me what A is in the box? What does oxytocin? What is it responsible for? Known as the love hormone, I can see some of you saying, and Johanna, I think you're saying they're great for forming attachments, so care bonding, definitely. Excellent. Anything else? Yep. JD Galaxy, to strengthen the bond between mother and child during breastfeeding, where oxytocin is released. Also released during childbirth. Yes, specifically, can you elaborate on that when we're talking about, I think Molly here, you've got it, contractions during birth. Excellent. Yeah, well done. So A does stimulate the contraction of the uterus during childbirth, and like a lot of you have realised, is important for caregiver infant bonding. Okay, great. What have we got for B then? Can anyone, I think some of you have already put B. Some of you put adrenaline. What else might it be? What else can we call that? Adrenaline and Some of you are going way ahead of me. I can see some really good answers coming through. Yeah, well done, Grace. Adrenaline and noradrenaline definitely prepares the body for fight or flight. And C, I think we already had some answers for C, actually. I think some of you are saying estrogen. Have we got any other hormones there apart from estrogen for C? You just scroll down. You guys are so fast today, so quick. What else have we got for C? Estrogen, I'm seeing, and progesterone. Rach Armstrong, well done, excellent. Yeah, and what have we got for D then? So what are they responsible for? Estrogen and progesterone. So Lauren, you've got regulates the menstrual cycle. Excellent, well done. So yeah, it's concerned obviously with the regulation of the female reproductive system, and that includes pregnancy as well. So well done, those of you that have written that down. And our last one then, E, for testosterone. Who can tell me about testosterone then? What function in the body? What does it do? Testosterone. Yeah, excellent. Well done, Henry. Secondary sexual characteristics. Well done. Yeah, seen as the male reproductive hormone, stimulates puberty. Yeah, excellent. We can also elaborate on that. Yes, it stimulates puberty, muscle mass, and muscle growth as well. So if we reveal the answers here, and I think this table here acts as quite a nice revision table, if you like, to kind of set out your different glands and hormones and their functions, which you are going to need to know. And not necessarily all of them, but I would definitely remember a fair few of these, okay, and their functions. All right, I'm going to move you over to Anne now for true or false.
Okay, so let's start with the first one then. So hemispheric lateralization is the idea that the two halves of the brain are functionally different. True or false? Yeah, loads and loads and loads of trues. I think everybody said true. What's the main study then for hemispheric lateralization? What's the main study? Yeah, it's the split brain, Sperry. Yeah, Sperry Gazaniga. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, then, so let's have the next question. So the right side of the brain is language dominant. True or false? Speed, got a couple of speedies there. Okay, so we've got loads and loads of false coming in there. Okay, that's false. Just thinking about language in the brain. So it's the left side that's dominant. But what two areas of the brain have been linked to language? Okay, I think somebody anticipated my question then, Nerd. Yeah, Wernicke's and Broca's area. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, then. So originally, the corpus callosum was severed to reduce symptoms of epilepsy. True or false? Yep. Loads and loads of trues, and we've still got some Broca's and some. So yes, it was in the Sperry research that we talked about. Okay, and the last one then, the right side of the brain controls the right side of the body. True or false? Okay, loads and loads of falses there. It's not true. It's the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. I'm just going to ask the question and somebody threw it in. A few of you, it's contralateral. Well done. Some really good use of key terms coming in here. So that's excellent. Okay, final one. Sperry's experiment was a quasi-experiment. True or false? Okay, so I think we've got Yeah, we've got quite a lot of truths there. It is often referred to as a quasi-experiment, even though there was no actual control group. But obviously the IV wasn't manipulated by the researcher. It was in control conditions. And I suppose in a sense they're comparing the behaviour of the split brain patients to those of people who haven't got a split brain. Sometimes it's referred to as a collection of case studies as well, of single case studies that were put together as well. And yes, we've got a nice definition of a quasi-experiment when there's already a pre-existing difference and it can't be manipulated by the researcher. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to pass you back to Anna now.
Okay, folks. So obviously we've been talking about Sperry quite a lot there, but just to highlight how it will appear in the exam, that question is split brain research. You won't actually get a question on Sperry because Sperry is not named. So just ensure you know that. Right. So here we're thinking about what we can say about Sperry's research in terms of whether or not we like it. So evaluation in that sense. All you've got to do, let's see you can get it first, is put these together into a perfect paragraph. Before I'd even finish saying it, you're already straight on it there. This is absolutely cracking, folks. Well done.
On fire tonight.
Okay, look at this. This is fantastic. Super. And it's interesting because there are a couple of little mistakes in there, which is why it's always good to take its time. Skye Wilkinson was very good there, just saying that she's my student. Okay, right. So let's see what the correct answer is. Right, we're looking for 51432. So we're talking about the strength of the research is the internal validity, and then you can talk about Sperry and the research that he did. A really nice word to throw into this is tachistoscope. So that's just the specialized technology that you used in order to be able to isolate the left and right hemispheres, ensuring that participants weren't just turning their heads to get both words in. Then we're talking about how controlled it was, etc., etc. So just kind of think about with Sperry, or split brain research as it is, just checking, can you actually evaluate the way that research was carried out? Obviously, we've given you a nice strength there, but there's plenty of limitations you can talk about, potentially the sample, all being epileptic, when not everybody with a split brain is epileptic. Okay, I think we're back over to Lara now.
Oh, we lost her. Okay, maybe a connection's timed out. Okay, so we've got a 30-second challenge then. So the first one is explain the function of the somatic nervous system. So 30 seconds in the chat box. Okay, so we've got some answers here. I wasn't prepared. Is Lara back yet?
Do you want me to take over? Because I was on. Yeah, so often this part of the nervous system, I don't know why, often gets overlooked by quite a lot of students. And I can see quite a lot of answers about the outside world and senses. So you're on the right line. So yeah, the somatic nervous system transmits information to and from the senses. So we're reading from the outside world and then to the central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord. And then what we're doing is we're outputting. So we're then going through our motor neurons to elicit a particular physical response, if you like. You don't necessarily need to know this, but it's made up of 12 cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So again, that does tend to be a bit of the nervous systems that tends to get missed out in terms of understanding. So please just go over somatic nervous system if you feel a bit wobbly on that one, okay? All right, the next question then is relay neurons often allow sensory and motor neurons to communicate with each other. What else might they be involved in, guys? Off you go. Yeah, great. I think you've got the ideas here. A lot of you are kind of pointing to reflex and reflex art, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Yeah. So, what the relay neurons are also or can be involved in is the analysis of a sensation and then gathering kind of what it means and then also deciding how to respond to it. Okay, so as opposed to going all the way to the brain and using all that time to decide and then an output, we're kind of going shortcutting, if you like, to the relay as a reflex arc and then deciding how to respond to it. Okay, so relay neurons can also be involved in that. So quite a quick response. We're going to do one more 30-second challenge question, then we're going to go straight over to questions for you guys. So according to synaptic transmission, what happens once neurotransmitters are connected with their receptor sites on the postsynaptic membrane? So what happens after this? Off you go. Yeah, so quite a few of you are saying they're recycled, but we do need some kind of a bit more of a key specialist term there. So this idea that they go for a process of reuptake. So this is where the presynaptic neuron kind of, if you like, hoovers them back up. So they're recycled, you are right, but we do need to make sure we use that word reuptake. They can also be destroyed by enzymes in the synaptic gap as well. So there's kind of two things that could occur there after they've had their desired effects. So some really good answers coming through tonight. We are actually going to head over to questions now. So you've got the opportunity to ask Anna, Anne and myself any questions on paper 2 that you want. And I think we're just going to go around and pick some out, basically. So whoever wants to start and sees a question. What's synaptic transmission? Yeah, good question. You do need to know this. It is in your biopsych. And this is basically explaining our neuronal communication where we impulse to a chemical impulse, potentially then to an electrical impulse again. So this is where you need to know kind of the difference between what happens at the presynaptic neuron, the vesicles, how the vesicles bind with the membrane to purge the neurotransmitters into the synapse. And then those neurotransmitters move from a high to a low gradient and they go and bind with their receptor sites on the postsynaptic membrane. They bind via lock and key, which means an adrenaline neurotransmitter can't bind to a serotonin receptor site. It has to go to its designated adrenaline receptor site, same as serotonin and its receptor site. Now, one of two things can occur here, either an EPSP, which is known as excitatory postsynaptic potential, which increases the likelihood of a action potential being fired in the postsynaptic membrane, so the signal continues, or an inhibitory postsynaptic potential, which means this increases the likelihood of an electrical signal continuing, which means communication kind of stops there, if you like. So, and as we said on our last question, once the neurotransmitters have had their desired effects, one of two things can occur, or maybe both. They go through a process of reuptake, where the presynaptic neuron hoovers the neurotransmitters back up into their vesicles to be reused, or they get destroyed in the synapse by enzymes. So I hope that answers your question, Master. Ovi.
Okay, I've got one. It was just quite a specific one. I'm not sure who it was, but they said, can manifest and latent content come up as part of the psychodynamic approach? And that's actually a really good question, because this is just about knowing specification, isn't it? So you're talking there about kind of like dream interpretation from Freud. So they're not gonna ask a question about manifest and latent content. And I would say, like, just always stick to your specification when you're thinking about what content you have to know.
Yeah, that picking up on, I've got another question to answer, but somebody said is Sam on the spec? No, it doesn't refer to it on the spec. It just refers to fight and flight and the role of adrenaline. But that is something that you can use on questions that are about the fight or flight response. So again, it's just obviously knowing exactly what's on the spec, because that's where the questions will come from, but it's also knowing about other key terms and concepts, because obviously that's going to increase the detail in your answer. The question that I was going to answer or give some tips one. I've seen a few questions asking about the 12-mark design a study question, which sometimes does and sometimes doesn't appear on paper too. I think the key thing with this question is you'll get your question and then you will get some bullet points, some things that you have to focus on in your answer. And always, and we say this over and over at the Grade Booster, use those bullet points as subheadings in your answer, and make sure that you address all of those things. So if you're asked to write a hypothesis, make sure you write a hypothesis. If you're asked to, suggest inferential and descriptive statistics, make sure that you do that. So just make sure that you address everything in there. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in with any kind of tips for those.
Yeah, I would say with what Anne said, that they're going to give you bullet points, try to avoid, I would say, writing just a huge block of writing. You need to make it look like it is a report, like you've written it up. So with the bullet points they're giving you, use those. So if it says variables, use variables as a subheading, and then write your variables in, full sentences underneath that, and your justifications. And that way you can't miss anything then, if you use those bullet points as your subheadings. And you don't want to be discussing or talking about anything other than those bullet points. If they haven't said to talk about the design, and you talk about the design and it's correct, even if they haven't asked for it, you're not going to get credit for it. So don't waste your time on anything they haven't asked for in those bullet points. Anna, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just thinking about the context is so important in those design and study questions. Like, you've always got to go back to context, and always you've got to justify things. So if you're talking about using a particular design, let's say, you have to explain why that design is appropriate for that study. And also, just because they give you 4 bullet points doesn't necessarily mean what you're going to write is equal between the 4 bullet points. Sometimes when they ask you to design an observation, they say, like, what behavioural categories will you use? And that might just be a few punchy bullet points. So don't think that it's kind of evenly weighted. And just I say to my students, use subheadings, use separate paragraphs. The examiner will like you if you do that.
And if you're asked to justify something, then you need to explain clearly why you've chosen to do that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We've got a question here by, I'm going to say Amya. Are we meant to know how to evaluate fight or flight? Yeah, I think maybe just to be clear here with biopsychology, if you're going in chronological order from start to end of the specification wording, from fight or flight, including fight or flight onwards, is where you need to have evaluative material. So anything previous in your textbooks to fight or flight, you don't need evaluation. So it's more AO1, it's more application. So for fight or flight, yes, you absolutely do. And I think the obvious one here, obviously, is to use kind of the gender bias, okay, particularly adopt Taylor study. If you've learned that, no worries if you haven't. So it's quite nice evaluation that lends itself really nice to some of the issues and debates there that you can think about. We've got another question here. Where did I see it? It was about content analysis, but I've actually, here we go. Amy Branston, can you talk about content analysis, please? Yes, I can, of course. So content analysis is a research method, and here what we're doing is we are analysing, if you like, qualitative data. So it might be a newspaper article, and we might be trying to analyse, I don't know, positive versus negative stories within the paper. Now, the difference between content analysis, and I'm just going to compare this with thematic because often students get them muddled. We have a preset kind of list of codes or categories for content analysis, okay? Whereas thematic analysis, those codes, they emerge as we get more familiar with the text. The other big difference between the two types of analysis is with content, we are reducing it, and we're reducing it down to quantitative, so to numbers. With thematic, we are reducing it, but we're summarizing it, and we're still keeping the qualitative nature of the data. So hopefully that makes sense. We have seen questions where you've had to apply, if you like, content analysis to a STEM. So it's really important with content analysis application questions that you can actually contextualize and say, for example, these might be some of the themes or codes we might use for this particular given behavior. And that's really important. You go the extra mile there and don't just say, oh, we'd analyze and read the data, we'd come up with codes, and then we'd count the amount of times they occur. That I could pick that up and put that for any content analysis question. It has to be contextualized. So just to bear that in mind with those types of questions.
There was a question from JT Galaxy, and again, great question. Says, I don't understand how non-parametric tests are more powerful than parametric tests, or is it the other way around? Also, is power of inferential tests on the spec? Don't worry about it. It's not on the specification. Nobody's going to ask you about the difference between a parametric and a non-parametric test. And I think it's hard because the tests that we talk about, some of them are parametric and some of them are not parametric. And some teachers will go into that as part of the process of explaining them. But really, I wouldn't worry about it. Another question on here, somebody's just asked, like, how do you do the sign test? It's really, really straightforward. What I say to my students is when you've got your two sets of data, just put a little minus sign in between them so you know which direction you're doing them in. It doesn't matter which direction you're doing them in as well, because it comes out with the same number anyway. So it's just going through each one, looking at the difference between them. Is it positive or negative? So if you've got 4 minus 3, that would be positive, let's say. No, it wouldn't. Yeah, it would be positive. And then all you do is you add up how many positive signs you've got, you add up how many negative signs you've got, and it's just, say if I've got 6 negatives and 3 positives, S, which is my calculator value, is just a smaller number, so it would be 3. So it is quite straightforward, I would say, the sign test. So hopefully nothing to get yourself in too much of a pickle about on that one.
Okay, I'm going to go for this one. Loads of people are asking for this one about how to compare approaches. Okay, yes, probably the most popular question at the moment. How do you structure comparison of approaches question? Well, typically it will be an essay, and the AO1 will be to compare the approach or to outline the approach or the approaches that you're asked to outline. So read that AO1 that bit very carefully, because sometimes it is only one approach. So it might say, for example, outline the biological approach, and that would be your AO1, your outline of the biological approach. And then the second part of the question might be like, compare the biological approach to the behaviourist approach. And that comparison would then form the AO3. And when you're being asked to compare two approaches, or any two things really, but we'll focus on approaches, what you need to be thinking about is, or comparing them, is how are they similar and how are they different? Okay, and the way to do this, and again, anybody who's been to Grade Booster, we go through this, is you can often make really good use of particularly the debates here. So you can compare them in terms of things like, how reductionist they are. You can compare them in terms of determinism. You can compare them in terms of being nomothetic and ideographic. But you can also compare them in terms of the treatments that they use. You can compare them in terms of how scientific they are. You can, there must be another one, the kind of research methods that they use. So there's lots of different ways that you can compare them. And when we do Grade Booster, what we suggest is that to plan for this question, to draw yourself a Venn diagram, so you've got your two circles and then they kind of overlap in the middle. In the middle, just jot down any ways that are similar, and then on the edges, jot down any way that they're different. And from that, quick brainstorm, then you can choose sort of maybe 3 or 4 points of comparison, either similarities or differences, that then you can build up, to paragraphs where you explain why it's a similarity or why it's a difference, and then offer, kind of evidence, examples, etc., from each approach to support what you're saying. And then you can round that up as well by saying whether, one comes out better than the other one and why. So hopefully, in just a very quick summary, I hope that really helps. Again, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything there.
No, I think that was pretty good, Anne. I've got a question here from Libs. What are examples of exogenous cyclopers and endogenous pacemakers? Okay, so again, sometimes can be quite easy to get these muddled. Endogenous pacemakers are our internal bodily clocks. So things like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, for example, which tends to get reset as well, and has an exogenous cyclopus kind of have an effect on that. So examples of exogenous cyclopus, one of the most important ones is light. Another one might be meal times and social cues. Again, really nice examples of those exogenous cyclopus because they really do have an effect on our endogenous pacemakers. Quite a lot of you are asking questions on parts of a report. So I think we've got Neve here, parts of a report. In terms of parts of a report of what you could get examined on, parts of a report, I'll just kind of reel off. The first starting point, sorry, you'd have title, you'd have abstract, introduction, method, results, discussion, references, appendices. Now, in terms of what you could get asked in the exam, you could get asked on the purpose of an abstract. It's unlikely you get asked to write an abstract because for that you need a heap of information, you need the whole report. You could get asked on any part of the method section of a report. Okay, you could get asked to kind of examine a box of findings and interpret what they mean. You could get asked to draw graphical displays of data as well. So remember those types of graphs, your histogram graph, your bar chart, and your scatter graph. You could get asked to discuss the findings. So that could include things like our statistics, our inferential findings. You could also get asked to formulate a reference to a book or a journal article. Now, we did get this question the other evening, actually, with Paper 1 exam clinic, and someone asked, could you get asked to write a reference? And the answer to that is potentially yes. And I think it has already been asked. I can't remember what exam series it is. Do you remember, Anna?
It was on paper 3, Anne,
It was
wasn't
definitely
it?
paper 3, and it was very early. It could even have been the first year. It's
Yeah,
quite
so
a long
quite
time
some
ago.
time ago then. Hey, so I would say learn how to reference a book and how to reference a journal. They're the
More
two.
likely to be, yeah. I think it's probably more likely to be a book, but
I think journal would be hard to get them to reference because part of referencing journal is it has to be in italics.
Yeah.
So I think where it's come up in the past, it's been for books, hasn't it?
Yeah. And it was more like kind of the order, wasn't it? The order that the things went in.
That was one of them, and one of them was like
got marked, I think. Yeah, it was.
Right one.
The other, sorry, go on, Anna.
No, carry on, Laura.
I was just going to say the other parts of a report that you could get asked to write about are, don't forget, the consent form, the standardized instructions, and the debrief form as well. So they're kind of the parts of the report that you could get examined on, basically. So kind of two there that you might not have thought about is the purpose of an abstract and also that referencing as well. So just bear in mind those two as well.
A couple that I've picked out, one quite short one was somebody asking about the differences between paradigms and paradigm shifts, which is great because you're showing that you know those features of science that are named on the spec. So that's fantastic. So a paradigm is just a set way of, like, say, seeing the world, let's say. So in science, the idea is that you share a paradigm. A paradigm shift happens when there's been revolutionary science, which is something that's happened to challenge the kind of current way of thinking that becomes so overwhelmingly powerful that the paradigm has to change. And this is something you might have spoke about in your class about whether or not psychology is a science. You know, we don't have a single paradigm for studying human behavior, but you could argue that psychology has had lots of different paradigm shifts. When you look at something like the origins of psychology and how we switch from one approach to another. Also, and there's been quite a few questions I've noticed just coming in on biological rhythms. Somebody just asking, like, what research do I use for the different biological rhythms? So yeah, I mean, it depends what you've been taught. So I might say something here and, you know, you might have done something quite different. So for circadian, which is obviously the sleep-wake cycle, I just use the cave study. It's quite straightforward. And I think just so long as you explain it correctly, that, you know, essentially it does show us how dominant that kind of internal time clock that we've got is. For the infradian rhythm I do is the menstrual cycle, and we look at the research by McClintock. She was the one that, you know, was a bit strange, getting pads under women's arms and pheromones, and she used to go around women in her college in her early days asking them when they'd had their periods. So she was a lot of fun. And then you've got ultradian rhythm, which is obviously the stages of sleep. The research I'd use for that is Dement and Kleitman. Again, quite annoying. They just got people to fall asleep and then wake them up and be like, you're having a dream. So that's potential research you could use for each of them. But like I say, it depends what you've been taught. So don't overlook it. It's a big last bullet point on specification, those circadian rhythms.
Okay, I've got some quick ones here. So do you need to know how to calculate the standard deviation? No. Don't worry about that one. Somebody asked the difference between descriptive and inferential statistics that I mentioned actually when I was talking about design and study. This is where it's kind of important to know what key terms are and how you're likely to be asked. Descriptive statistics, I think the clue is in the word. It's statistics that describe the data. So this is your measures of central tendency, your mean, your median, your mode, your measures of dispersion, the range, the standard deviation. Graphs and charts, they're descriptive statistics as well. So they describe the data. When we talk about inferential statistics, and it comes from infer, and that's talking about the statistical test. So again, you need to be familiar with that phrase because you won't be asked what statistical test will be appropriate for this data. You'll be asked what inferential test will be appropriate for this data. So really important to understand what those key terms mean. Third quick one. Somebody asked the difference between event sampling and time sampling. Now, again, this is often misunderstood, this question, when it's asking about sampling, because people kind of get into their heads that you're being asked about the actual sample and how they got the sample for the study. When it's in an observation, they're asking about the sampling of behaviour. Event sampling is where you kind of look at the whole event using your behavioural checklist and tally, put your sort of, your bar in the tally chart when you see each behaviour that you're looking at occurring. That is event sampling, but that's very difficult to do if it's a behaviour that's occurring like a lot of the time. And so what you might choose to do is time sampling, where you kind of break it up into time segments. So you might just record behaviour every 2 minutes, for example. You would look what was happening and put, and record that on in your tally chart. So I hope those are some quick questions just to...
Okay, we've got, continue on from that for research methods. We've got Kelly Ann, please can you go how to write a debrief? And we've also got similar questions by Caro on how to write a consent form. I'll go through the consent form first and do the debrief form after. So for the consent form, you're providing information to the participants so they can make obviously a choice of whether they're going to participate. So basically anything that might influence the participants' willingness to participate should be included, and this needs to be thought about carefully, particularly with any research that might be to do with natural behaviour or social behaviours. You might not be able to give away the full kind of aims of the study. So that's something to think about when you're reading those stems in the exam. One of the most important things to include in a consent form, as hopefully you already know, is the right to withdraw. Also, something surrounding confidentiality, so assurance of that, privacy, an opportunity for any questions. And I think one of the most important things, which again, a lot of students kind of are a bit surprised sometimes when we say this, and that is it needs to look like a consent form, meaning there should be a signature line and a date line, with, a statement to say they've understood, for example, at the end of the consent form. That really demonstrates to the examiner that you realise it's a document they've got to sign to say, yeah, I agree with the thing. So that's kind of the general structure of a consent form. Debrief form is slightly different because obviously it's given after the study. So with a debrief form, if you have deceived the participants in the consent form or throughout the study, then this is where you can kind of set the world right. You can thank them for their participation. If there were 2 conditions and it was independent groups, you might reveal the other group, the other condition in the debrief, say what the other condition was. You may also give an option of the participants to ask any questions, as well as reminding them that they have the right to withdraw their data even after the study is over, to withdraw themselves and their data from the study. Okay, and normally there might be kind of contact details on the debrief form. I've had a rumor, and if you guys have before, Anna and Anne, where students have actually put their own contact details down. for the debrief form. So don't do that. Okay, you can, if you're required to do that, and for a debrief form, then you can make something up. But otherwise, don't worry about that at all. Okay, so most important thing there is that reminder of right to withdraw, and that really goes for standardized instructions as well. I would say, one of the most important ethical considerations, exaggerate when it comes to conducting a study, not only before, hopefully with informed consent, also throughout, and also at the end again it's reminded. So don't miss that right to withdraw out on those forms.
That's it. Somebody's asking about kind of distributions. There's a lot of chat here about how could I know what type of distribution it is from a data. And again, that was a question that came up, I think it was last year actually. So you just look at the position of the mean. Basically, it's just the mean and the mode really that you mean, median and mode. And all you've got to do is just kind of think, if the mean is lower than the mode, it's a negative skew. And if it's higher than the mode, it's a positive skew. So I always think of it, it's where the mean's going in the direction, if you like, skew. I think when you're looking at to get confused, because you always think like, well, the mode's the highest value because that's the peak, and you're on the wrong axes basically if you're looking at it in that way. Yes. Okay.
Do you want to answer this one? Anyone?
I would say, you know what, I'd use the specification and just work my way through it. Like, it's obvious just looking at some of these comments that it's really easy to get confused about what's on the spec and not on the spec. Somebody asked earlier about how do I calculate split half? It's like, well, you don't, because it's not on the specification. So just literally just work your way through it. Use it as a set of bullet points just to go through. Practicing questions is always good, particularly designer study questions. By now you should have hopefully worked your way through a good proportion, I would say, of those past papers, and check on the mark scheme. Somebody said as well, like, oh, any advice for anyone who hates research methods and basically doesn't want to sit down and do 48 marks in it? I would say that's where you're going to make your gains, research methods. These are going to be the things that will be the difference to you in terms of grade. So every question you can answer in research methods and answer well, it puts you in that kind of top end. So maybe think about using that as your motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one by Baguette here, Laura. What does abstract mean in psychology journal article terms? Yeah, as I think this kind of maybe relates to what I was saying before, that you might get asked on the purpose of the abstract. The purpose of an abstract, the way I explain it to my students, is if anybody, hopefully you all do read books here, but when you pick up a new book, what do you read first? You read the blurb on the back, right? That's basically what an abstract is for a journal article. So the abstract is the last thing the researcher writes, but it's the first thing the reader reads, to distinguish whether the reader is going to find the journal article useful to read. Sometimes these articles are pages long, 50 pages. Well, you're not going to sit there and read 50 pages, are you? And then to get to the end and think, oh, well, that wasn't useless for my research. You're going to read the abstract first. So the abstract is basically a summary, if you like, of the aims, maybe the hypothesis that's being tested, the prediction, the methods, some findings, and kind of what the concluding remark of that is, if you like, in short. So that's kind of what an abstract means. There was another question that I was going to answer, but it went when we went, so I haven't got it. So if anybody's got another question, then
I've got one. Somebody asked about the measures of central tendency and when to use them. So just quickly then, sometimes it makes sense to look at all of them, because that'll tell you whether your data is skewed or not, but some are more appropriate for certain things. So the mean, the most appropriate to use if you've got interval data, but where there are no anomalies, so no, it's not skewed. The median is the most appropriate where you've got ordinal level data, so the order that it comes in, but not the distance between points on the scale. Or if you've got interval data, but you have got some anomalies, then you need to use the median. And the mode is the most appropriate one to use with nominal data, when it is the category with the highest score. So that was just a quickie.
So, somebody, Confused Potatoes, asking about peer review. And again, that's good. That's a really good question to be asking. So you're thinking of long answer questions on peer review as well, really. So It's that process prior to publication where the research essentially needs to be checked. You can't get a journal publishing research and then potentially having to retract that research because maybe it's not reliable or valid. And I say to my students, it's a little bit like that UCAS system. You know, you might submit an article and it might come back like, you know, no, nothing to change. We'll have you straight away, or you might get a bit of a conditional offer where maybe, you know, they don't like some of your tables, etc. The purpose of peer review is obviously really important. It's to check that your data is valid, that your methods are valid. It's to check that you haven't plagiarized somebody else's research. And also with peer review, check, you know, some evaluations of the process. Is quite a lot, like I said, in extended questions there. You know, the idea that it's, you know, an anonymous process, which is supposed to be a good thing. However, it's really easy to know people in your scientific field, so potentially that's problematic. And someone's just put in the comment there, is peer review the one that can be biased? Absolutely, it can be a biased process in that sense. So yeah, again, great question. Certainly one not to, I would say, overlook, and potentially is a longer answer question there.
We've got one by Lena here. Difference between ordinal and interval level data, please. Yeah, often two types of levels of data that tend to get a bit muddled. So ordinal and interval data are both, if you like, ranked, but they do vary, and that is, I would say, interval is more of an objective measure, so an ordinal is more subjective. And I'm going to give you an example to demonstrate this. Some of you may have already heard this example that I give. So for ordinal data, let's say you were doing 100-meter race with friends. You came first over the finish line. Your friend came second. Your other friend came third. The distance between the person that crossed first and second is not going to be the same equidistance as the person that came over second and third. It's going to probably be different, yeah? So they're not equal kind of measurements between. Interval level data is, and that's why we tend to say it's a bit more objective. So if we take temperature, the difference between 1 and 2 Celsius is the same equidistance between 2 and 3 Celsius. So it's just a nice way to remember. And I'd say for your levels of data, do have examples for nominal, ordinal, and interval, just to get that kind of structure and that kind of familiarity down in your minds. Remember, when you're asked to decide what sort of inferential test to do on a particular set of data and justify your choices, you are using your levels of data. And the first question you should be asking yourself is it category? Is it a tally? Because as soon as you've eliminated that, in other words, that it's not nominal, it's either going to be ordinal and interval, and then that's a nice way to distinguish. Okay, is it more of a subjective rating or is it more of an objective rating?
Okay, another quick one from Alexandra. I think the difference between external and ecological validity. Well, there's not a difference between them. Ecological validity is a type of external validity. When we talk about external validity, it's to do with how well the findings of the study can be generalized outside of the study, external. So ecological validity is one example. Population validity would be another one. Temporal validity. They're all types of external validity. So that's just a very quick answer there.
Right, gosh, we've gone through loads and time's absolutely flown, hasn't it? But it's not over yet. Oh, I am now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We just can't see you anymore.
Oh, you can manage without me. That's fine. I think I've just shut my thingy. Oh, what am I doing? Doesn't matter. We can go without me. So I'm going to put some quick fire questions on the screen then, because I know we've had a lot of people in the comments asking some questions over and over again, and we haven't quite got to them, but we do see them. Don't worry. So let me put. Let's go for this one first of all. We had that one about abstract, didn't we?
Yeah.
What about this one? Good question, isn't it? Actually, if you're asked to write a consent form, do you have to deceive them, etc.? Anna?
Oh, I think that'll be implied in the stem that you get. I think what they want you to do in that consent form will be that it will say something like it was important that the participants weren't aware of the aim of the study or something. I would say they would guide you towards that, because that's quite nuanced, isn't it? And I think with consent forms, it might not be that difficult, but I think there'd be some guidance in the stem about deception and if you had to use it.
And normally you have to show ethical considerations anyway, don't you? So I'd say most of the time it's going to be ethical and honest. Is it possible to get a 16 marker on all these rhythms? Yeah. Anyone disagree?
No, I mean,
It is possible.
it is possible, and I think there's a lot of chat about this, isn't there? I think AQA have kind of said it might be more likely with a stem, but that's not to say it's solely with a stem. So potentially.
And you can get your 60 in, but you can also get your 60 in on the pacemakers and zeitgebers, can't you, as well? So lots of variations, but some of those studies that were mentioned before, like Cypher's Cave study, and some of the other ones, you can almost duplicate your use of some of those studies, can't you? And the way that you conclude them will help you to address whatever the question is. Once is a 16 marker? I don't think so. Although now I've said that, who knows? But in terms of one, what would you, Laura, some quick bullet points for AO1?
Yeah, so probably give the history and the background. So first, open the first psychology lab up. Obviously, you need to discuss introspection. You need to explain what introspection actually is, and maybe establish that Wundt was kind of the first person to actually study psychology in what he thought was an objective way, which brings me on to evaluation, where you can evaluate Wundt in saying that actually, while he strived to be objective, actually potentially was quite subjective and biased. So you want to be talking about that, because obviously introspection is about participants really looking inwards and reporting on their own sensations, feelings, and images. So again, he was hoping to be objective, but actually we could arguably say that he wasn't. So
Fab. Oh, you can bring in some paradigm shifts like somebody mentioned earlier as well. Okay, Anna, briefly, like super brief, difference between plasticity and recovery. You're on mute. You're on mute still. So
Can't hear you.
don't know, she's just doing a little dance. So in terms of plasticity, this is really all about your brain. I suppose becoming better over time, isn't it? It's got lots of neurons that help with skill development, etc. When you're younger, those start to die off as you get older. But it's the assumption that other areas of your brain can pick up the slack for other ones. And functional recovery. It's functional recovery after injury, isn't it, or something like that. So if you're suffering from some type of brain damage through accident or stroke or something like that, then the assumption is that, say for example, if Broca's area was damaged on the left, another area on the right might pick up that, and you could still have language function. So you see these as two separate things named on your spec, but they kind of come hand in hand, so you can often talk about them together. And you've got lots of studies there that you can use as well. What about key features of science, Laura? Super quick.
yeah, key features science. You've got objectivity, replicability. You've got, obviously, as we spoke about, paradigm shift. You've also got falsifiability, and I know I'm forgetting one, empiricism as well, which is obviously observing through our senses. If I've missed anything out there, I'm sorry.
Very good. I was dreading that one.
A bit of this area of the spec doesn't probably get enough attention, I would say. And it's because it's boring and it is tricky, but you do need to look at it. Okay, a couple more. Difference between infradian and ultradian. Anne?
Oh no! Don't think I get mixed up with these. I get muddled with the
The
numbers.
infradian, which we mentioned earlier, that's your monthlies, isn't it?
It is. So
That's
a cycle that's greater than 24 hours, isn't it?
Yeah. So you've got your
Ultradian.
circadian.
Is ultradian the sleep within? You can tell I don't do paper.
It's okay. You've got your circadians, which is your 24 hours, like your sleep-wake cycle. Infradians, which is your monthlies, like your menstrual cycle. Seasonal affective disorder. You could talk migration and hibernation if you wanted. But ultradian, they're the ones that happen quick. So round about, say, every 90 minutes. Concentration, alertness, hunger, thirst. And then the big one for your spec is your sleep stages, where you talk about all those different stages of sleep, the alpha waves, the delta waves, the REM sleep, etc. Did we answer this one before about peer review?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, fab. Can we get nervous system as a 16 marker? No. We've done key features of science. How long should we spend on research methods to finish us off?
I would say at least an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, an hour is what you should be spending, but I know some students find research methods more challenging than the other two topics. But, the minimum is an hour, because it's 48 marks. So it's 2 half an hours, basically, if you like.
Yeah, so it is worth much more. Anna, did you have something you wanted to say? I think you're off mute now.
Yeah, you muted me.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, same, yeah, just minimum of an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so your exam is coming up very soon this week, so let's leave you with some top tips. If we haven't answered anything, don't think we haven't seen it, head over onto Instagram and you can ask us in the chat or on our posts. We will answer every question that's asked. And if there's a common question that's being asked, then we'll put some posts up about it to help you, not on your own. So my quick tip, probably stealing Laura's one here, would be to make sure you contextualise and research methods. So if a question says in this study, don't ignore it. If it's asking you to do it, just do it. Laura?
Yeah, I would say do not leave anything blank in the exam. Even if you don't know the answer, muster a guess, because you'd be surprised at the amount of what looks like muster a guesses get a mark, and that could be a difference potentially to a grade. So don't leave anything blank.
Great. Anne?
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it with the hour for research methods, but it is watch your timings on your sections and your questions. Don't spend too much time, don't spend 10 minutes on a 4-mark question. For the short answer questions, you are basically thinking 1 mark, 1 minute, to allow yourself proper time for the longer essays and the longer answers where you need to be doing some planning, which is another tip.
Fab. And Anna, to finish us off?
I think on approaches, 16 markers, use the spec subheadings to kind of give your AO1 content. That's what I would say. Use them as a guide about what to have in AO1. You won't cover it all,